Hey there, this is Perch. How closely should you look at comic numbers? Well, it's become a hobby and a pastime for a lot of people in social media and when they're writing articles, and they basically want to prove one of 2 points. And point number one is the comic industry is dying, it's imploding. We have only a couple days left. The asteroid is coming; it's going to knock out the whole planet. That's theory number one. And then the theory number two is the comic business is booming. It's doing amazing. Oh my God. All these people who say it's doing bad are dumb, and it's actually doing amazing. And those tend to be the 2 points people start with. And then to back into those points, they need some facts, because you can just say that, but people want some data, some facts. And so they tend to pull out facts. And those typically come from numbers. And as we've talked about before, on this show, the numbers tend to be wildly inaccurate, or at least described very inaccurately. So, for example, they'll say, comic stores are closing left and right. Every day there's a comic store closing. Well, it is a brutal time for brick and mortar comic stores, and they are closing, and it's not healthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not closing every day. New shops are opening. They are closing at a faster rate than they're opening. That's absolutely true. However, it's hard to pin that on comics, because the costs that are rising and the other elements like rent, like competition, just general brick and mortar, how more people are going to online sales. There's a lot of reasons why you can't say comic stores are closing, thus the comics are bad. It's not to say the comics aren't bad. It's just that is not the full reason, and there's really obvious examples that are bigger. The other one is that people, as we've talked about in the past, they'll point to numbers. They'll say, well, back in the '80s, average, I've heard this statement before: if a comic sold under 100,000 copies, it was canceled. Yeah, that's not that's a wild exaggeration of something Jim Shooter sort of, kind of, not really said. And that was during the market where you had the mass market, not just the direct market. You had returnability, and that was pre-returnability. So the comment that gets wildly taken out of context is, when we're producing our comics, when we're preparing things for distribution, getting ready to ship them, we tend to think of volumes of 100,000, because we have to make up for the returnability. And if they fall below those volumes, it's hard to justify the comic. That's very different, very, very different. And it's acknowledging the fact that you're not selling 100,000 copies or even close to it. But on the other end, it's equally obnoxious. Right now, there's some Comic Con data that came out, and that states, hey, the business grew by it's growing from last year. It's growing by a couple percentage points from last year, and units are actually down, but dollars are up. And but that's good news, and it is good news. It's good news that things are going in a level, or positive way, for instead of down. That's an improvement, but that's not to say good. And so when people are like, hey, the comics market is growing, everybody, yay! That's again, that's a wildly, grossly inaccurate look at those numbers. And unfortunately, these comments, nobody is really doing any of the work to dig into them and really explain what they mean and the context behind them. They're just throwing these numbers out in hopes of getting some "Yas Queen," yes, thumbs up, yeah, this is the final nail in comics, or this is the final nail in people who hate comics, or it's it's not at all a relevant piece of data. So, my question: how closely should you pay attention to the numbers? Well, I mean, the first answer to that is, if you're a comic reader, maybe not at all. Maybe what you should pay attention to is the comics you like, and the comics you want to read, and the creators you want to chase. Maybe just stop there. Getting into the numbers, if you're not actually going into the business of selling comics and producing comics and distributing comics, if you're not going into that business, then why bother? And you might go, well, it's better to be informed. Yes, sort of. But if you're going to be informed, you got to be informed all the way. You got to get to the real understanding of what these numbers are, and be very, very careful of people who want to use those numbers to tilt your opinion to one of those two extremes. And this is it's one of the big follies of news, is You've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, whenever there's an up month, whenever there's any bit of positive news, the news sites, which primarily exist on free comps and maybe some ad money, are rapidly, very, very quick to post a flying in the face of all the people who say comics industry is dying is this amazing news that says the comic industry is as stable as ever. It's like, well, let's ignore the last 16 months, but sure, this month things are looking up. And the same thing, if you go on a YouTube channel, it's like, guys, the comic industry is dying. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's like, yeah, except the numbers don't prove that. So if you're going to pay attention to the numbers, pay attention to them all the way. Get the facts. Understand what these numbers mean. Understand the context of these numbers. Don't look at a 30-day view or a 60-day view or even a 12-month view. You've got to look at a bigger view than that. Think about it this way, if you were to take money out of your bank and open up a comic store or become a publisher or do anything, then I certainly hope you're thinking longer term than 1 year, because you couldn't run your business if that's the time span you looked at. You have to be thinking in terms of 5 years, in 10 years. You're making a big financial investment of your money. So you should really consider what it is you're doing. And why this topic irritates me, other than the obvious, is that we need solutions. And this is probably what it's easy for me on a personal level to largely just ignore the super negative view. It's silly, it's not based in fact half the time, and it just tends to kind of get ranted and echoed around. It's that is for the most part easily ignored. What's harder to ignore are the Pollyanna, the sky is amazing and comics are perfect and everything is wonderful, when there are serious things that need to be addressed. Because that point of view tends to immediately shut down the conversation about what needs to be addressed. If we're talking price point, if we're talking distribution, if we're talking modernization, if we're talking variant schemes, incentive covers, if we're talking about quality vetting of creators and editors and staff, if we're talking about basic marketing, if we're talking about sustainability of comic shops, I can go on and on and on. These topics need to be discussed, and they need to be discussed in a serious, real way if we want this industry to stabilize. Because otherwise, what you're seeing is a very common business trick where the money is getting squeezed out of the industry. The distribution is changing, and there's not a solid other answer that is in place yet. It may just magically fall into place, but I'm not the kind of person who likes to just wake up one morning and hope that everything will be fine. I don't need to fill a car up with gas. It will just run somehow. I don't need to, save money in the bank. Somebody else will take care of me when I'm old. You need to plan, and you need to make need to make this business solid if we want it to continue. And again, when I say if I want it to continue, comics will continue. The business is not in any danger of vanishing. People are not going to wake up one day and go, well, I guess all the money's gone. We will stop drawing. Comics will continue. These licensed properties are multi-billion-dollar properties. They also will continue. Spider-Man's going nowhere. But it would sure be nice if we had a robust, healthy, lots of content to choose from, plenty of opportunities for creators, pay for the people who are in comics that is meeting or exceeding the national average, given they're creating such valuable IP. It's funny. It's one thing that's always confused me is that you talk to any creator, they will tell you that there's the work for hire gig is crap, and the money, they like stability and they'd like all these things. They complain openly about these problems, yet you put them on the spot of like, okay, let's figure out how to fix this. Let's figure out what we can do. And there becomes a remarkable acceptance of where things are at. It's baffling to me. I don't want people to go out into the streets and shake their fist and rant and rave, but the amount of creators that have taken the plunge and gone off and done some creator-owned work, that have managed their careers and really tried to take the bulls by the horns and do something with themselves. Whether you're, this is the Miller or Reminder or some of the folks like that who have actually really tried to push for themselves. generally things work out okay for those guys. They hustle, they get their job done. You also don't see them on Twitter every day saying the business is about to implode or the business is the best it's ever been. Everything is awesome. You see them just getting their work done. So how close should you pay attention to the numbers? If you're not willing to do the work and really understanding the numbers, don't. Just just leave them alone. They're not helpful to you. It's not helpful to win an argument based off of pointing to numbers that paint a very weird picture. It's not helpful to point to an up month and say, see, everything is perfect, or a down month and say, see, everything is imploding. The state of the business, if you look at the chart, and we'll put this chart up here, is that the comics has shown steady growth in terms of profits. Units is a bit of a different story and a more complex story. If you take a look at the auxiliary revenue that's being pushed off of this stuff, meaning merchandising, meaning kind of IP sales, meaning all the rest, you see a very healthy curve. Yet, if you look at the fundamentals to the business, how things are getting ordered, who's owning what percentage of the pie, how much of the dollars are controlled by small groups. If you're talking about the direct market, how many, is the wealth distributed, or are, five stores basically controlling 90% of the wealth? What if you look at those numbers, you get a pretty shaky picture. Now that should be good news, and the good news spin, not to make it spin, but the good news spin should be, look at all the money that could be in this business. Look at the strong fundamentals. Look at the platform. If I went out and raised money, if I did a Series A round raising investment money, I could point to these fundamentals and say, look, there's clearly money in these hills. There's clearly a business that people want to engage in, want to invest in. Look, it's got some long term stability and growth. Look at the 10-year picture. But we have to be disruptive. We have to change certain core aspects of the business because, as you can see, there's a lot. There's not nearly the maximization of this wealth that there should be, and it's very fragile. And if you had a couple of these elements vanish, if you had, say, two large box chains disappear from the market, if you had them withdraw, you would see a sharp decline. You wouldn't see the implosion of the industry, but you would see a sharp decline. And the business would figure itself out. Others would rise up. New stores would take the weight. Uh, Maybe that would push digital to do something else. Things would fix themselves. They would self-correct. But there would be money loss. It would not be instant. And it would take time for these things to work themselves out. So therefore, if you're going to an investor, your pitch would be, there's a lot of money, a lot of good possibility here, but it's going to require intervention and it's going to require some changes, which is a smart and sensible thing to say. How much should you pay attention to the numbers? You know, only as much as your sanity can take it. That's really the answer. Hey, thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. Do you pay attention to the numbers religiously? Does this matter to you? Do you take comfort from seeing the ups and downs of sales charts? Do you go to Comic-Con and pore over the numbers every month, addicted to it? Why? What is it that you're getting out of it? Would love to hear from you. Hey, like, subscribe, follow. Would love to hear more from you. And thanks for listening.